Oh hey, the one and only Dusty Bottoms here, founder of Kingdom Trucking Academy. It's been several weeks now since our last video. I'm sure most of you have missed us. We have been busy, extremely busy, busier than we thought we'd be. We've been busy opening our flagship location here in Kansas City. It's our first public school location. We had to jump through a lot of hoops. We had to deal with several different government entities to get certified and accredited to open. It was way more complicated than I had anticipated. And I've been in this industry a while. It just was tedious. And it took a lot more of my time, while at the same time, we had customers all across the United States that we still had to facilitate for our private training portion of our company. And we started out in 2023 as a private training company. We would be traveling providers. We went across the United States, training companies on site and their equipment. We had so much success, and we were asked by state officials to open our own school here in Kansas. So there's a lot of working parts. We had to find a facility that was big enough for equipment. We had to purchase equipment. Yeah, and there's a lot into it. We had several government organizations for really overseeing our opening. We had to get accredited. We had to verify everything with the FMCSA. We had to verify everything with the 2 state agencies that oversaw us. So that took way longer than we hoped, but we got it all done. Fortunately, just didn't have time to do all of that and make videos with our production team. But we're back now. So we'll start pumping out our weekly videos like we always have been. So in today's video, we're gonna be discussing something I had to deal with when we were getting ready to open our school. And that is the myth of 160 training hours. So let's get started. The myth of 160 training hours. Where did it come from? How did it become an industry standard? What's the rules? What's the regulations? All of that stuff we're going to be discussing. Because when I was getting ready to open our school, there was a certain length of time I wanted to train. When I was overseeing training at one of the local colleges that I worked at for several years, for one reason or another, due to our size and some of the clients that we had, at a certain point, I had to condense training down to 2 weeks. It wasn't optimal. It wasn't something I was accustomed to doing, but I had to do it. And in the process, I had success doing it. So something I didn't think was feasible, I ended up doing. And I ended up having a lot of success. So we continued doing that, continued raising the bar, and continued to have more success. At that point in time, I was able to establish the last iteration of what would go on to become the Kingdom Driver Training Program. As I stated, I worked at several different schools over the last 7 years, along with my experience in the trucking industry as a professional driver for almost 25 years now. Actually, it's been more than 25 years. I just had a birthday and I'm getting much older. I said, we've been busy. So through all of that process, I learned what I could do, and I learned through discussing with my wife how we wanted to approach opening Kingdom Trucking Academy. We wanted to establish ourselves as a standard, separate ourselves from the rest of the pack. Everybody is doing it the same. They're 4 weeks long, 160 hours. So me being me, I had to do a deep dive into this 160 hours. Why? I know for a fact that it's not a federal regulation. So why are all these schools doing it? What's the reason? What's the purpose behind it? And a lot of people get super touchy about it. Almost like COVID all over again. All this misinformation, media getting behind it, people thinking you have to do one thing and not looking at the facts and other possibilities. Well, that's kind of what the 160 training hours is. So here it is. 160 training hours came about in 1986. The PTDI was established in 1986. At that time, there was no governing body. There was no real rules or regulations as it pertained to commercial driver's licensing. In fact, they weren't even called commercial driver's license back then. They were chauffeur's license. So without a standard, without any kind of regulations, some of these CDL schools across the country operated like the Wild Wild West. And I'm not saying they were bad. I'm not saying anything. There wasn't anything to establish. There was nothing to fall back on. The FMCSA hadn't been created yet. Department of Transportation hadn't been created yet. So the PTDI was a nonprofit organization that came along in 1986, and they began setting standards in the trucking industry. And why did anybody listen? Well, because there was nobody else doing it. And what's really interesting about this is the PTDI's first president, the head of the organization, a guy by the name of Ed Cranston. I hope I pronounced that right. Anyways, what's Ed's experience in the trucking industry? It's got to be great. He has had to been a truck driver for a very long time because now he's the de facto top dog telling other CDL schools how to do their program. Well, you'd be surprised to learn, just as I was, that Ed's never driven a truck before. Ed's never been a professional truck driver. What is his experience? Well, Ed works for the California Highway Patrol for over 20 years. In what facet? We call them now DOT. Highway Patrol guys are the ones who, as most truckers know, pull you over. They're the ones who give you tickets. They're the ones who cite you for infractions. What are most of the Highway Patrol's experience in the trucking industry? Absolutely none. Absolutely none. They couldn't operate the truck. They couldn't probably pass their CDL. Now, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to point out facts. There's always the exception to the rule, but I guarantee you a vast majority of them couldn't do any of these things. What they can do is find all of the infractions on your vehicle because they usually go through a 5, maybe 10 day training period with an instructor who's probably never driven as well. But they go through this training period, how to look for infractions, what to see. They might not be able to tell you, but I'm pretty sure they can tell you what those parts actually do, all these things, and what the functions are. But they can tell you it's broken, it needs fixed, and here's a ticket. What's even funnier is my experience with these officers is when I was out west working in excavation, they'd pull us over all the time. And I always found this laughable. They would pull out these digital scales, and I'm sure you've heard me talk about this if you watch any of our videos before. They'd pull out these digital scales, and they'd have you back up on them. Now, these digital scales can only weigh a single axle. Now, I understand the rules and regulations, laws tell you, each individual axle can only carry so much weight. But in excavation, even though you have a load ticket, because you've already got weighed and you're underweight, these intelligent, experienced people would weigh that single axle and tell you it's overweight. Well, because load shifts sometimes. And they would tell you it's overweight, even though I don't know how well these have been calibrated. I don't know the efficacy of this, but those scales tell you you're overweight, and now you got to go to court to fight it, or you got to pay a hefty fine. That is the quality of understanding that we're dealing with. So, Ed became the first president of an organization, nonprofit organization, who most schools then relied on to guide them in a standard of how to train and educate future truck drivers. Again, let me state that again. Having no experience as a trucker was telling other trucking schools how to train truckers. Yes, it's absurd. It's like an orderly at a hospital with no medical background or experience, then writing the standards for surgeons to become doctors. It blows my mind. This is a problem in the trucking industry. You have all of these pencil pushers with no experience telling everyone how to do it. And we're foolish enough to listen to it. So again, I'm not trying to be derogatory towards Ed, but he's posited himself, much like a lot of people, as an expert. Again, I can't consider you an expert if you've never driven a truck, if you don't have a CDL, if you have no experience as a professional truck driver. I cannot consider you an expert. It's like being in logistics or being a freight broker or a dispatcher. Yes, you work in the trucking industry, and yes, you have experience in the trucking industry, but that's extremely misleading. You work in a specific lane in the trucking industry, but that doesn't make you an experienced trucker. It doesn't make you experienced in the trucking industry. That makes you experienced in one facet of the trucking industry that a monkey could do. Sorry, I am who I am. I'm gonna say it like I say it. I'm gonna tell you the truth. But this kind of stuff drives me absolutely bananas. So I digress. Back to my point. So 160 hours was trained, not by a whole lot of research, not by any of these things. It fit nicely in a 4-week box, 40 hours a week. And they set guidelines. This many hours of classroom time, this many hours of hands-on training, this many hours of driving. And so all of these schools began to adopt this. And even so, 3 states in the United States still require new drivers, people that don't have CDLs that are getting tests, to have a minimum of 160 hours. Washington, Illinois, and Kentucky. Now, Washington, we currently know what's going on with them and how great their CDL practices are. Illinois, well, I'm not even gonna get into it. This is an arbitrary number that was established by people that don't really have a whole lot of trucking experience. When I say trucking experience, I mean driving experience, making up rules and regulations. So, again, just adopted by everyone. So when the FMCSA was formed, the PTDI no longer had function. So they essentially, instead of dissolving, they reorganized their management structure in 2016. They became part of the TCA by moving their headquarters to Denver, Colorado, and then reorganized and became NAITMI, N-A-I-T-M-I. I think that's the acronym. If I'm wrong, I apologize. But what they do now to this day is they offer accrediting certifications, things like that. I've even got on there and talked to them about getting accredited. They're just online certificates. They're just paper certificates. To me, they don't really mean much. I'm not trying to talk smack on them, but again, it's just paper certificate. You pay money to them, you get a paper certificate. A lot of schools still do that. That doesn't mean you're a good instructor or anything. It's, like I said, just a paper certificate. Here's what's even more interesting about this. So, all of these schools across the United States adopted this 160 training hours. The 160 training hours, some of the biggest schools in the United States, we'll start with the bigger ones. 160 Drive Academy, 160 is already in the name, was founded by a guy named Steve Gold. I'm not trying to talk smack on Steve Gold, I'm just telling the truth. Steve Gold, what's his professional driving background? Zero, none. No trucking experience whatsoever. Steve Gold founded 160 Drive Academy in 2012. I mean, no trucking experience. He was a business guy, finance guy. That's all I need. Again, I applaud his business prowess. I do. But Steve tries to posit himself as a trucking expert. Steve, you're not a trucking expert. You don't know shit. Sorry. You think you do, and that's what makes it scary. You're not a professional trucker. You don't have any professional trucking experience. Sit your ass down, buddy. But again, kudos to you for being a great business guy. But I've been to the 160 academies. They tried to hire me after I left my first school I worked at. Crappy. Bunch of franchises across the nation, ran by a bunch of imbeciles. Their instructors can't teach crap. It's terrible. They don't produce quality drivers. Okay, moving on. TransUnion. TransUnion is a big corporation that owns several CDL schools across the country. In fact, I think they own the most CDL schools across the United States. The guy that runs the CDL training division, a guy by the name of Al Hanley III. Al comes from a long line of CDL instructors, not truckers, CDL instructors. His grandparents in 1963, I think in New York, opened their first trucking school. So Al is not a professional truck driver, but he's third generation CDL instructor. I worked one of the schools I worked at for a guy who had no trucking experience, who had a career that wasn't even close to trucking. One of his co-workers or somebody he knew who had retired before opened a trucking school. He went to work for that person at their trucking school. Having never been a professional truck driver, went to work for that school. I think he got fired, quit, whatever. He's not an honest person, so the story changed. Then he eventually opened his own, or bought, not even opened, bought an existing moving company out west. Owned that for a few years before it went bankrupt, or he sold it, depending on how he tells the story. It changes, but he claims he owned a trucking company. Well, he didn't own a trucking company. He sort of did. He owned a moving company, but he was not a truck driver. He's lazy. I know he wasn't driving a truck. Minimal experience before he opened the CDL school that I would work at. Again, he tries to posit himself as an expert, much like Steve Gold. Not an expert. You were never a career professional driver. Never. Sit your ass down. Again, Al Hanley III oversees some of the biggest trucking schools in the country, having never been a professional truck driver himself. Again, not talking smack. I'm sure Al's a nice guy. He opened a trucking school with his sibling in 1991 before eventually becoming a part of TransUnion. So, moving on. One of the other largest trucking schools is another school by the name of C1. C1 was formed or founded by a guy by the name of Chris Welch. Again, Chris was probably a nice guy, very smart business prowess, for recognizing a deficit, lack of truck driver training. What is his experience as a professional driver? It is none. Chris was a project manager for Cummins Engine. Great, I'm sure he's a smart guy, got some business savvy, but no professional truck driving experience. He runs a lot of trucking schools, trains, and is responsible for overseeing a lot of truckers getting trained, but not a professional truck driver, no experience. Hopefully you're starting to see the pattern here. One of the other schools I'm going to talk about is U.S. Truck Driver Training, or U.S. Trucker Training, one of this, down Southwest. It was founded by a guy by the name of Tyler Barge. What is Tyler's trucking experience? Again, absolutely not. He worked or was partners for CDL School Marketing Company, or CDL Marketing Company. Again, saw a need, opened some schools. Never been a professional truck driver. As I'm demonstrating this pattern, what I'm starting to tell you is all of these people follow this 160, this arbitrary number, because they've never been a truck driver themselves. They were never trucking instructors themselves, with the exception of Al. But Al was never a professional trucker. Al was probably just doing what his family taught. Again, this is like the blind leading the blind. These guys don't have the experience or the knowledge, so they just follow suit. They probably print off some papers from the state, hand them to some drivers that they hired to be instructors and said, go show them what to do. Again, I applaud your business prowess. I do, but I don't applaud your lack of knowledge in the industry. And lastly, Roadmasters, large school. They were founded in Florida in the early 90s, and before they were acquired by Warner Enterprises in 2014 and made public in 2015. Now, a lot of these are sold as franchises operated by other people. Now, C.L. Werner started in the 40s, Werner Enterprises or Werner Trucking. Now, he was an actual truck driver. He was the first truck driver for his company. So the lineages moved on, a lot of trucking experience, things like that. But again, he didn't actually form Roadmasters. They just took over a bunch of trucking schools. So these are supposed to be some of the industry leaders. And none of them have actually been professional truck drivers, with the asterisks, again, of the Werners. But most of these guys can't design a curriculum. They don't have this understanding or any of that. These are one of the things that separate Kingdom Driving Academy from all the rest. Because I've been a professional truck driver. I've had experience as a CDL instructor and overseeing programs, designing curriculums, and testing them out, seeing what works and what doesn't work. And then I've passed that knowledge on to other instructors. So, the last thing I'm going to get into is this misconception of CDL mills and other things. Now, there are a lot of CDL mills out there. Yeah, I'm not lying. I even work for one of them. What a CDL mill is versus what people think it is totally different. Just because a school is fast doesn't make it a CDL mill. We're 2 weeks long. We're smaller class sizes. We provide a lot of one-on-one training, and all of our students get a lot of drive time. In fact, they get more drive time than any of these other schools that are 4 weeks long, about 160 training hours. Why? Because the 160 training hours is a misconception. And that's what I'm going to get into. And that's why a lot of these places are in fact CDL mills, even though they're 160 training hours. Because this is what happens. And I know this for a fact because I worked at one. There are 8, 10, 12, sometimes 16 students per class with an average cost. Each student's paying an average of $5,000 to $7,000. A lot of these classes are every week or every 2 weeks. So do the math and you start seeing the money. Now, most of these schools provide 1, maybe 2 trucks. Come on, man. So that's a lot of people trying to get seat time in 1 truck. Most likely with 1, maybe 2 instructors barking orders at them. And those 2 instructors aren't even on the same page. So you get a lot of inexperienced people coming in, getting trained by a lot of inexperienced people. That does not produce quality drivers. So what I'm getting at is all these people come in, they're not getting as much seat time, but they're physically at this place for 160 hours. Like I said, it's all smoke and mirrors, this 160 hours. You go to a school, none of these drivers, none of these graduates, the students that are there, not a single one of them have actually gotten 160 hours of training and driving time. They are just physically there for 160 hours. Most of them will all have less experience, less knowledge, and less drive time than they would at a school like ours that is much shorter. But we can get accused, even though this is unfounded, of being a CDL mill school because we're short. Not the length and time, man. It's the quality of training. Now, there are some short schools. I saw one out in Las Vegas. That is essentially a CDL mill. It's a 1-day school. Everybody's going to pass. I think things have probably changed now since the laws have changed and gotten tighter. But places like that are CDL mills. And yes, there are a bunch of CDL mill schools out there, but there's also a lot of quote unquote good accredited schools, like one I used to work at, that is in fact a CDL mill. In fact, this school could get shut down or lose their license because I even witnessed this school. As an examiner, you have to get, at the time, 10 exams in a year. Well, the owner never got 10 exams in a year. Sometimes he'd have one of the instructors, usually the head instructor, do the test for him and he would just sign off on it because he didn't have the time to go down there and test. Well, that's highly illegal. And one of the most common things that happen at this school is, this happens a lot. You get a student that gets really nervous when they go to test and they do horribly, like say on the skills test. But during class time, while they were in school, they did great. They just have what you call test anxiety. Well, if you get nervous on a test, you're probably not qualified anyways. But anyways, these people would get nervous and they would fail their test. So eventually the third and fourth tests, what one of the instructors would do is he would go down there with his test sheet and all that and hold it behind his back, set up the person, have the person test them. So they tell him, just do a couple of practice ones before I test you. Unbeknownst to the student, he would actually be waiting for them to have a passing one. Sometimes it was their first round, sometimes it was their second round. Then he would tell them, oh, that was it, you're done. I tested you. And they'd be shocked and happy. That's illegal. You have to inform the person you're testing. You have to go through all of that process. You have to stop them with each skill maneuver. Again, highly illegal. So this is a CDL mill because they're just trying to pass you to get you out of there because it costs them money if you're still sticking around. But anyways, I move on. So you have all of these schools out there. Some of them, again, most are all smoke and mirrors. You do have some great schools out there that are ran by people that were drivers. One of them, that's not Kingdom Trucking Academy, is up in Washington, of all places, owned by a guy named Jason. He runs 509. They're good, they're quality, they're legit. Jason even started CDL Power Suite, which is a program that goes to CDL schools that CDL schools use to keep track of all of their files, all of their DQ, driver qualification stuff, their instructors, all that stuff. It's a great program. But anyways, so there are some good schools out there that are ran by people that actually have experience in the trucking industry. The ones that are ran by people that aren't from the trucking industry, don't have professional truck driving experience, they're garbage. And that's kind of why the 160 training hours is BS. It's all arbitrary. It's created by people that have no trucking experience. Hell, even to this day, the new standardized and the modernized testing, all of that is created by ANVA for the FMCSA. You know how many people in ANVA have experience as professional truck drivers? Not very many, and these are the ones, again, creating the tests based on studies for drivers. Now, like I said, and I keep saying this, it is all smoke and mirrors. It's all a bunch of arbitrary things. The last point I'm going to try to make is everybody tries to put all of this stuff on CDL schools. They try to say it's CDL schools' responsibility to train these drivers and make them great. Well, that's BS. Whether you're a 2-week school, a 4-week school, or even a 6-week school, that is not enough time to get these people trained and make them great drivers. What a CDL school is actually here for. Again, a CDL school is here to give you the basic foundation to go on and take your test, pass your test, and move on to the next phase of your career, which is actually starting your career and going to work for one of these motor carriers and getting your driver experience. I don't see anybody crying about driver's ed. 14, 15-year-olds required, or used to be required, I had to go to driver's ed. We spent a few weeks driving around, getting taught all the rules, regulations of the road, because it gave us a foundation. But once we got on the road, we were terrible drivers still. Like, we still needed to get experience. Some people were good, some people sucked, and some people were in between. But over the years, you're supposed to get experience and grow. That's what you're supposed to do after you graduate a CDL school. A CDL school is supposed to prepare you for the next step. No, we're not supposed to pass you, and we're not just here to pass a CDL test. Yes, the main function is to get you prepared and give you the foundation so you can pass the CDL test and you can begin your career. So it's misleading, it's misunderstanding, it's misinformation. It's all of those things to think a CDL school is supposed to make you a professional driver. No, a CDL school is step one in the process. Now, I'm not an important person, so I don't get to go out to Congress like some of these other people, some of these other organizations like OOIDA, the ATA, or the TCA, or any of those things. However, I don't know why not. I'm the trucking messiah, man. Bring me out there. I've sat in enough trials. I've testified enough times. Bring me to Congress. I'll tell you how it is, how it really, really is. What needs to happen is, just like the TPR, you have to register to become a training provider. We need to start making laws that require motor carrier companies to register in a TPR to be training carriers, motor carrier trainers. Because if you go to a Werner or you go to Schneider as a new driver, they're going to put you through a 9 to 12 week training with a driver trainer. And that driver trainer is going to get you prepared for being out on the road on your own. That's like 3 months. They're going to train you every single day to be a professional truck driver. And that's what should happen. What should happen is you should be required to go work for one of these registered trainers, motor carriers that are trainers, and not only get your 3 months of training, but it should be required, no matter how you want to quantify this, you should either be required to get a certain number of drive miles or a certain number of hours, whether it's 2 years, 1 year, or 3 years, however you want to do it. I think 2 years. 2 years, a certain number of hours minimum before you can go work for a non-certified company, like one of those smaller Joe Bob's outfit that only owns 3 in-dump trucks and doesn't want to become a registered training provider and only hires people with experience, but he used to hire people fresh out, paying 15, 20 bucks an hour. Well, that's dangerous. That's what happened with this Florida driver, or this driver in Florida, and all the non-domiciled, all the foreign thing started happening. I'll get into that in a second. But that would have never happened. That owner wouldn't have existed if you had this regulation, if you had this rule in place that required people to get a certain number of hours or a certain number of miles in before they can go work for one of these companies, before they can get their own motor carrier authority, before they can get any of these things. That way, you're not hiring somebody fresh out and you're not getting away with not providing them training because it's your nephew or whatever, and you own a crappy operation. No. Now, what does also shore up is, whether you agree with this or not, we have all this non-domiciled, all these foreigners driving trucks. Well, one of the biggest issues is experience, all of these things, and there are a lot of shortcuts. I have seen it. A lot of them go work for a family member that cut corners too, was a graduate just a year ago, bought a bunch of trucks with money, family money, and then these people will come work for them in their crappy trucks, there's no training, and then they get on wrecks like what happened in Florida, or what's been happening all across the country. If you make this law, if you make this regulation that these companies have to get registered to become training providers, some of the bigger carriers, you have to have a certain number of trucks, you have to have a certain number of years of operation, and you have to qualify as one of these motor carrier trainers. And you gotta be subject to audits, just like the rest of us in the TPR. But you make these standard requirements, then you will shore up some of that problem. So being non-domiciled, being foreign won't matter. Yes, you still have to mandate the ELP. That's a necessity. But if you make these requirements of training, then they're getting quality training at a CDL school. And the onus is no longer on the CDL school. They go to one of these major motor carriers that's going to train them, and they're going to get them years of service before they can start their own company, before they can go work for a smaller company, all of these things. Then what ends up happening is everybody on the road over the next 5 years are qualified. They're safe. They're doing everything right. Yeah, you're going to have a few bad apples, but you will shore up that problem. Hopefully, you appreciated this information. Hopefully, I was able to inform you the myth of the 160 training hours, what should happen, how you shore it up, and what a CDL school's responsibility is and not. And that, again, is why Kingdom Trucking Academy is so much better than most people. All of our instructors are KDP certified before they can even train a class. They go through a rigorous training process and certification process before we even let them teach a class. So all of our students are getting taught by certified, qualified instructors. Remember, quality and safety is our main priority. We want you to go work for a carrier that we help you go work for, get hired on, and be a safe driver, be a great driver. I am your one and only Dusty Bottoms, your trucking messiah. I hope you enjoyed the video. Roll on, truckers, roll on.